The wind came down from the mountains, with teeth carving through the valley like a predator hunting prey. Chaska knelt in the snow, one knee pressing into frozen earth that bit through his buckskin leggings, and studied the boot prints staggering northward through the sage. His breath misted in the frigid air, each exhalation a small cloud that dissipated into the gray afternoon. The tracks were fresh no more than an hour old, and they told a story of desperation. Two lighter sets, probably women judging by the narrow heel marks, weaving and stumbling. A heavier drag mark between them as if they carried something or someone too heavy for their strength. He was 28 years old, a Lakota scout, with a puckered scar on his left shoulder where a miner's pickaxe had caught him 3 years back during a claim dispute that had turned bloody. The scar ached in cold weather, a constant reminder that survival in this territory meant watching every shadow, trusting no man's word over the evidence of your own eyes. His Winchester Model 1873 carbine hung beneath his buffalo hide coat, its walnut stock worn smooth from years of handling. The weapon was loaded, always loaded, because the frontier made no distinction between the prepared and the dead. The prints split near a cluster of cottonwoods, then converged again, more frantic. Chaska rose his joints, protesting the cold, and followed. His mother had taught him to read tracks before he could read English, back when she was alive, back when his younger brother still laughed and chased rabbits through the summer grass. Both were gone now. His mother to fever 8 years past, his brother crushed beneath a railroad tie when surveyors pushed through Lakota land without permission or conscience. No one had been held accountable. No one ever was. A rifle shot cracked the silence. Chaska's hand went to his carbine, instinctively chambering a round as he broke into a loping run. The cottonwood grove loomed ahead, skeletal branches rattling like bones in the wind. Another shot closer. He heard a woman's voice, sharp with panic, shouting words he could not yet distinguish. He burst through the tree line and saw them. Two young women in torn calico dresses, faces wind-burned and gaunt, struggled to drag an older woman on a wooden door plank across the snow. The elder's head lolled, eyes half-closed, breath coming in shallow, rattling gasps. One of the younger women, dark hair tied back with a frayed ribbon, gray eyes fierce despite exhaustion, gripped the front of the plank with hands that shook from cold and effort. The other woman, nearly identical in features but with shorter hair, hacked unevenly at her shoulders, fired a lever-action rifle toward the tree line with desperate, unpracticed movements. Wolf eyes glinted in the falling snow. 6 of them, maybe 7, circling at 30 yards. Their ribs showed through matted fur hunger, making them bold in a way that turned Chaska's stomach. Starving wolves were unpredictable, dangerous in ways that even men were not. The shorter-haired woman fired again. The rifle clicked empty. She fumbled for cartridges, fingers clumsy with cold, and cursed in a language that sounded like French mixed with English. Chaska stepped into the clearing and raised his Winchester Model 1873. The wolf's head swung toward him, yellow eyes assessing this new threat. He fired twice in quick succession. The first shot kicked up snow and frozen earth between the lead wolf and the women close enough that the animal yelped and scrambled back. The second round clipped a low branch above the pack's flank, sending bark and splinters raining down. The wolves scattered, melting into the timber with the eerie silence of wraiths. But Chaska knew they would not go far. Animals driven by starvation did not surrender easily. They would circle, wait, and return when darkness fell. The dark-haired woman spun toward him, one hand dropping to a skinning knife at her belt. Her eyes were wild-cornered. "Who are you?" "No time for questions," Chaska said, his voice rougher than he intended. He slung his carbine and moved to the plank. Up close, he could see the elder woman, more clearly pale skin, stretched over sharp bones. Lips tinged blue, breath fogging weakly. Pneumonia or close to it. Without shelter and heat, she would be dead by morning. Where are you going? Trapper cabin. The shorter-haired woman gasped, pointing east with a trembling hand. Half-mile, maybe less. Please, our grandmother is burning with fever. Chaska shouldered the front of the plank without another word. The dark-haired woman hesitated for only a heartbeat, then took position opposite him, her fingers wrapping around the rough wood. As they lifted together, their elbows locked briefly, and he felt the tremor in her arms, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding on for too long. Her breath clouded near his cheek, warm against the frigid air. She smelled of wood smoke and sweat and something sharper fear maybe, or determination so fierce it became its own kind of scent. Stay with me, he said, meeting those storm-gray eyes. I will, she replied, and her voice was steady despite the shake in her hands. They moved as fast as the terrain allowed, boots crunching through snow that had crusted over with ice. The shorter-haired woman flanked them, reloading the rifle with fumbling movements. Chaska glanced at her, once assessing young, maybe 20 or 21, with the kind of quick, nervous energy that came from intelligence untempered by experience. Her ankle was swollen beneath her torn skirt. She limped badly but did not complain. The frozen creek appeared ahead, a ribbon of white cutting through the valley. Chaska tested the ice with one boot, feeling for give. It held. Quickly, stay in my tracks. They crossed single file. Halfway across, the ice groaned beneath the shorter-haired woman's weight. A crack spiderwebbed outward. She froze, eyes wide. Chaska released the plank and grabbed her wrist in one smooth motion, hauling her forward just as the ice gave way. Her boot plunged into black water up to the knee. She gasped at the cold, but Chaska did not let go, dragging her onto solid ground. The dark-haired woman had braced the plank alone, muscles straining, refusing to let her grandmother slide. Chaska returned to his position without a word, and they lifted together again. The cabin materialized through the swirling snow like something half-remembered from a fever dream, a collapsed trapper's shack with a sagging roof and walls that barely held against the wind. The door hung crooked on leather hinges. Chaska kicked it fully open and dragged a fallen sapling from nearby, jamming it diagonally across the frame to brace against the gusts that howled through gaps in the chinked logs. Inside the floor was packed dirt, frozen hard as stone. Frost coated the interior walls in delicate, deadly patterns. The dark-haired woman lowered her grandmother onto a pile of moth-eaten furs in the corner, moving with the careful tenderness of someone who had done this many times before. The shorter-haired woman knelt beside her, checking pulse and breathing with shaking hands. She is fading fast, the younger sister whispered, and there was naked terror in her voice. Fire first, Chaska interrupted, surveying the space with the clinical eye of someone who had survived too many winters to count. One broken window, a rusted stove with a cracked flue, and enough drafts to kill them all before sunrise. Then we worry about everything else. He worked quickly, pitching a small canvas lodge inside the ruins, a survival technique voyageurs had taught him years ago when he guided freight wagons through blizzards that turned men into frozen statues overnight. The canvas created a smaller, insulated space within the larger structure, trapping precious heat. He kindled a fire in the old stove, using dry bark from his pack and a handful of pine resin he kept wrapped in oilcloth. Smoke curled upward, most escaping through the cracked flue, enough lingering to sting eyes, but warm bodies. While he worked, the two women tended their grandmother with practiced efficiency. The dark-haired one removed the elder's soaked shawl and wrapped her in a threadbare blanket that had been tied to the plank. The younger sister propped their grandmother's head on a folded coat and tried to coax water past cracked, feverish lips. "Winona," the dark-haired woman said suddenly, turning to face Chaska. Her voice was formal, careful. "My name is Winona. This is my sister Ayasha. Our grandmother is Serafina." Chaska nodded once, feeding kindling into the growing flames. Chaska. Lakota. Winona asked, and there was no judgment in the question, only recognition. Yes. She did not flinch. Most settlers did, especially out here where tensions ran high and memories of violence, real or imagined, festered like infected wounds. Thank you for helping us. Chaska grunted acknowledgement, not trusting himself to say more. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. It implied debt, and debt could be weaponized. By the time full darkness fell, the canvas lodge glowed like a small sun against the encroaching cold. Chaska set a blackened tin pot over the stove's flat top and emptied a leather pouch of dried venison, wild onions he had gathered in autumn, and cracked corn into melted snow. The stew simmered slowly, filling the cramped space with warmth and the smell of something close to comfort, a luxury he had learned not to take for granted. He wore his beadwork headband, white and blue patterns his mother had stitched in the months before she died. A single eagle feather was tied into his long, black hair, bound with sinew. His knife remained sheathed at his belt, positioned for a quick draw if needed. His carbine leaned against the canvas wall within arm's reach. Old habits. Serafina sat propped on a stool, wrapped in every blanket they could spare. Her frail frame trembled despite the heat radiating from the stove. Winona and Ayasha held dented tin bowls, hands still smeared with dirt and dried blood from dragging the plank across miles of frozen wasteland. Their dresses were torn at the hems, sleeves, ragged faces marked by exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. Chaska ladled portions, carefully rationing like a soldier who had learned that today's generosity could mean tomorrow's starvation. When he handed Winona her bowl, their fingers brushed a fleeting point of contact that sent unexpected warmth up his arm. She paused, gray eyes flicking to his face, before taking the bowl with a quiet word of thanks. Chaska kept his attention divided between the fire and the door. Wolves were one category of threat. Men were another, often more dangerous, always less predictable. Winona ate slowly, methodically, her gaze constantly drifting to the door and the shadows beyond the canvas. Chaska recognized that vigilance. It was the look of someone who had learned that safety was an illusion and relaxation an invitation to disaster. Ayasha, by contrast, seemed unable to contain her nervous energy. Her voice filled the silence, words tumbling out in a rush as if speaking them aloud might impose order on chaos. "A freight company took our wagon 3 weeks ago," she said between careful bites, trying to make the food last. "Claimed we owed back assessments on a shipment we never ordered. Then Deputy Bram Kearns came to our boarding house in Frost Hollow, said our grandmother never paid taxes on land she inherited from her husband. Gave us 1 week to settle the debt or face seizure. We had no money, no way to pay. Then men came in the night. We heard them on the stairs kicking in doors. We ran." "Where were you trying to reach?" Chaska asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Anywhere away from here," Ayasha replied, and her voice cracked. "Maybe the fort 3 days north. Maybe just away." Serafina stirred her pale eyes, flickering open with the glazed look of fever. She spoke in French voice, thin and reedy as wind through winter grass. "La vallée. Ils ont écrit faux. Les morts sont enterrés." Chaska's hand stilled on his bowl. The words struck him with the force of recognition, not just understanding the language, but understanding the weight behind it. His mother had learned French from Missouri River voyageurs, who traded furs and stories, who sang songs in a language that predated the American settlers' westward hunger. She had taught him that language alongside Lakota and English, creating a bridge between worlds that often felt irreconcilable. The valley. They wrote it wrong. The dead are buried. He translated quietly, switching to English. Serafina's eyes fixed on him with sudden sharpness, fever momentarily burned away by recognition. "Vous comprenez?" she whispered. "You understand." Oui. Chaska leaned closer. What did they write wrong, grandmother? Les frontières? Le patron de la mine? Il change la carte. Her breathing labored. Bury truth with bodies. Winona leaned forward urgently. What is she saying? Chaska met her eyes. She says someone falsified land boundaries. The mine boss changed the maps. She mentions bodies being buried. Clem Rusk, Winona said, and the name came out like a curse. The mine boss owns half of Frost Hollow and wants the other half. Our grandmother's land sits over a silver vein, or so Rusk claims. He has been trying to take it for 2 years. A violent gust rattled the canvas lodge, scattering sparks from the stove. Chaska moved instantly, smothering the embers with a damp hide before they could catch on the dry canvas. Winona's hand shot out reflexively, steadying on his wrist, a brief charged contact. He felt the calluses on her palm, the unexpected strength in her grip. She pulled back quickly, color rising in her wind-burned cheeks. Sorry, she murmured. No need, Chaska said, returning to the stove. But he was aware of the place where her hand had been a ghost of warmth against his skin. Later, after Serafina had fallen into fevered sleep and Ayasha dozed against the canvas wall, mouth open in exhaustion, Chaska examined the younger sister's ankle. Swollen to twice its normal size, mottled purple and yellow around the joint. He bound it carefully with strips torn from his own spare shirt, wrapping in the diagonal pattern that provided support without cutting off circulation, a technique he had learned from a cavalry surgeon during a brief stint as an army scout before he realized he could not stomach the orders that came with that work. You will need to rewrap this at dawn, he told Ayasha, showing her the knot. Keep weight off it as much as possible. And if I cannot... Her voice was drowsy, slurred with exhaustion. Then I will carry you. He said it plainly, a simple statement of fact rather than gallantry. Ayasha smiled faintly, eyes already closing. You are strange. For a scout. How so? Most would have left us in the snow. Chaska glanced at Winona, who watched from across the fire with an expression he could not quite read. Most people do what keeps them alive longest. I do the same. He stood and hung his feathered bonnet on a wooden peg near the door, a gesture of respect for the elder present, following Lakota custom when entering a space with those who commanded honor through age or suffering. His knife stayed sheathed, but visible, a reminder that courtesy had limits. Winona spoke quietly, careful not to wake her sister. Why are you helping us? It was a fair question. Chaska considered it while feeding another piece of wood into the stove, watching the flames catch and spread. Outside, wind howled like something alive and hungry. Inside, the fire crackled with false security. Because you were still standing when I found you, he finally said. Still fighting back. And if we had not been... He met her gaze directly. Then you would not have needed my help. She studied him for a long moment, gray eyes reflecting firelight, searching for deception or hidden motive. Whatever she saw must have satisfied some internal test, because she nodded slowly. I do not know what we can offer you in return. I did not ask for anything. Everyone wants something eventually. Then I want you alive. That is payment enough. Winona's breath caught almost imperceptibly. She looked away into the fire, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Why would that matter to you? You do not know us. Because he had seen too many people die for no reason. Because his brother's death had taught him that doing nothing was its own kind of violence. Because silence in the face of injustice made you complicit in it. But these were not things easily explained to a stranger in a frozen cabin with wolves circling outside. Because it is right, he said simply. Winona's jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she might argue. Instead, she nodded. Then we will stay. if you can bring help for our grandmother. There is a doctor in Frost Hollow, May Whitcomb. She treats anyone who needs it, does not ask questions that could put people at risk. I can bring her here. Kearns will arrest her for helping us. Kearns does not own everyone in that town. Chaska adjusted the fire-banking coals for a slow, steady burn through the night. Dr. Whitcomb cannot be bought. I have seen her tell sheriffs and mine bosses both to go to blazes when they tried to interfere with her patients. And you? Winona asked. Can you be bought? I have been offered. I refused. He paused, remembering Captain Mercer's face when Chaska had walked away from that particular pile of money. That refusal cost me work, but I can still look at myself in a mirror. Something shifted in Winona's expression. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. If you bring the doctor, what do we owe you? Chaska shook his head. Nothing. Debt creates obligation. Obligation creates leverage. I need to know what you will ask for. Then consider it a gift with no strings. He saw her skepticism and added, I lost people I should have protected. I will not lose more if I can prevent it. Winona absorbed this, her gaze softening fractionally. Then bring the doctor. We will be here. As dawn broke gray and reluctant, Chaska saddled his bay mare, a sturdy animal with a white blaze and the steady temperament required for frontier work. He rode 2 miles south through snow that had deepened overnight, following memory and instinct to Eli Hargis's homestead. Eli was a poor farmer with debts to the mine company, but a reputation for honesty that was worth more than gold in a place like Frost Hollow. Chaska found him in the yard, chopping wood with methodical swings that spoke of long practice. Eli straightened when he heard Hoofbeat's axe held ready, not threatening, but not welcoming either. He was in his early 30s, weathered beyond his years, with the cautious eyes of a man who had been cheated before. Need a favor, Chaska said without preamble, dismounting. Eli's expression remained neutral. What kind? Ride to town. Fetch Dr. Whitcomb. Tell her it is urgent. A woman with pneumonia needs treatment. Do not mention names. I will pay for your time and risk. Eli frowned, glancing at the cabin behind him, where smoke rose from the chimney. Rusk has men watching the roads. If they see me riding to fetch the doctor and ask questions. Chaska reached into his coat and produced a silver dollar, a significant sum more than Eli might earn in a week of hard labor. He flipped the coin so it spun in the cold air before landing in the snow at Eli's feet. Eli bent, picked it up, tested it with his teeth. Tell anyone who asks that you cut yourself with the axe, Chaska suggested. Show them a bandage if necessary. Make it believable. Eli studied the coin, then Chaska's face. Who is this for? Does it matter? A long pause stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of wind through bare branches. Finally, Eli pocketed the coin and nodded. I will bring her. But if Kearns stops me and this goes wrong, it will not. Chaska swung back onto his mare. Dr. Whitcomb will ask no questions. You are simply a farmer who needs stitches. Eli nodded slowly. Give me 2 hours. Chaska rode back faster than he had come, arriving to find the situation inside the cabin deteriorated. Serafina's breathing had become labored and wet, rattling in her chest like stones in a jar. Her lips had taken on a blue tinge that Chaska recognized as dangerous. Winona knelt beside her grandmother, whispering prayers in a mixture of French and English that spoke of Catholic upbringing colliding with frontier necessity. Ayasha paced, despite her injured ankle limping in tight circles like a caged animal. True to his word, Eli arrived within 2 hours, riding alongside Dr. May Whitcomb. May was a woman in her mid-40s, with iron-gray hair braided so tightly it seemed to pull her scalp and hands, that moved with the decisive confidence of decades spent treating injuries and illnesses that would have killed patients in softer places. She entered the cabin without hesitation, set down her worn leather medical bag, and examined Serafina with brisk efficiency. Pneumonia, advanced stage. May pronounced, after listening to the elder's lungs through a wooden stethoscope. Fluid in both lungs. She needs rest, constant warmth, and medicine I do not carry in my bag. What I can give her will ease symptoms, but at her age... She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Will she survive? Winona asked, voice steady but eyes betraying her fear. If fortune favors us, yes. If not... May mixed herbs from glass vials in her bag, crushing them into hot water to create a bitter-smelling tea. The next 24 hours will tell us. May coaxed the liquid past Serafina's lips with patient persistence. The elder's eyes fluttered open, suddenly sharp and focused despite the fever. She grabbed Chaska's wrist with surprising strength, pulling him close enough that her breath rasped against his ear. Écoute-moi, she whispered urgently. Listen to me. Le patron de la mine, Clem Rusk, et le député Kearns. Ils ont changé le relevé, tué les colons il y a 2 ans, enterré les corps sous les déchets de la mine, blâmé les Lakota, pris la terre. Her French was rapid, desperate, the words of someone who knew time was running out. J'ai vu. J'ai écrit. Preuve dans la lettre. La lettre de mon mari. Ancienne frontière. Vraie frontière. Chaska's blood chilled. You saw them kill settlers. You wrote down proof. Serafina's grip tightened, nails digging into his wrist. La boîte à musique. Regarde dedans. Mes filles, elles vont chercher le registre. Arrête-les. What is she saying? Winona demanded, moving closer. Chaska switched to English, though his voice remained low. She says Rusk and Deputy Kearns falsified land surveys. 2 years ago, they killed settlers, buried the bodies under mine waste, and blamed Lakota raiders to justify taking the land. She claims she witnessed it, wrote down proof. She says it is hidden in a music box. She says your sister is going after a ledger. He stopped scanning the small space. Where is Ayasha? Winona's face went white. She was here when I fell asleep. I thought. She scrambled to the door, throwing it open. Fresh boot prints led north through the snow, 2 sets, one limping badly. No, no. I told her we would wait for help. Why would she? The ledger, Chaska said grimly, already reaching for his carbine. She went to get proof from the mine office. We have to stop her, Winona said, grabbing her coat. You stay here with your grandmother. She is my sister. I am coming. Chaska saw the steel in her eyes. A new argument would waste time. He turned to Eli. Stay here. Guard them with your life. If riders come, bar the door and shoot through the window. Do not open it for anyone except me or Dr. Whitcomb. Eli nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. I will hold. Chaska moved to his pack and retrieved a blue enamel music box with a brass key. Serafina had pressed it into his hands before Dr. Whitcomb arrived, eyes desperate. He twisted the key, and thin, mournful music played. The melody was unfamiliar, but haunting. He turned the box over, found a loose seam in the lining, and pried it open. Inside, folded so tightly it was nearly invisible, lay a yellowed piece of paper covered in faded French script and hand-drawn maps. Survey lines, coordinates, landmark notations. In the margins, in shaky handwriting that was clearly more recent, Serafina had added notes. Saut Mortel Trois Corps, Mur de Pierre Creek Shift, dates and locations. He pocketed the letter and swung onto his mare. Winona stepped forward, jaw set. I am coming. No time to argue. Can you ride? Well enough. He reached down and pulled her up behind him with one arm. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing close out of necessity. They rode hard across the frozen prairie snow, kicking up in white plumes behind them. The prairie stretched endless and white under a sky the color of old iron. Chaska followed Ayasha's tracks. With growing unease, the limping gait was still visible, but it had been joined by a second set of much larger prints. Then a third. The tracks converged, and signs of struggle appeared: scuffed snow, a torn piece of calico fabric, and a gag cloth half buried in a drift, stained dark with saliva. Winona dismounted before Chaska could stop her snatching up the cloth. They took her. Chaska studied the ground with the clinical detachment that came from years of tracking. Drag marks led east toward deep ruts in the snow, a freight sledge heavy laden. 2 riders had flanked it, horses shod in the distinctive pattern used by the mine company. One animal favored its left hind leg, leaving an asymmetric track pattern that Chaska would recognize anywhere. This was planned, he said, following the trail with his eyes. They were waiting for someone to leave that cabin. Makar, Kearns, Winona said, voice tight with controlled fury. Or Rusk's men, acting on his orders. Chaska remounted, offering his hand. Either way, the tracks lead toward Frost Hollow. They followed at a hard gallop, the mare's breath steaming in the cold air. The sledge trail veered into a gulch lined with greasewood and scrub oak, the terrain turning treacherous with hidden rocks and ice. Chaska reined in sharply, instinct screaming warning. 2 riders burst from the brush on either side, appearing so suddenly they seemed conjured from the snow itself. The first raised a revolver and fired. The shot went wide, but close enough that Chaska heard the bullet whine past his ear. He drew his Winchester Model 1873, one-handed, a move he had practiced countless times, and fired from horseback. The round caught the rider high in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle in a spray of red against white snow. The second rider charged with a knife, drawn clearly planning to close distance before Chaska could cycle another round. But Chaska kicked free of the stirrups and threw himself sideways, colliding with the man mid-charge. They hit the frozen ground hard enough to drive the air from Chaska's lungs. The knife flashed downward. Chaska caught the man's wrist, twisted sharply against the joint, and drove his knee into the attacker's ribs. He felt bones give way. The knife tumbled free. Chaska pinned the man's forearm across his throat, applying just enough pressure to make breathing difficult without crushing the windpipe entirely. "Who sent you?" Chaska demanded. The man wheezed, face purpling. "Deputy Kearns. Boss wants. Witness is gone." "Where is the girl you took?" "Sledge, heading town square." The man choked, gasping. "You are dead man. Indian." Chaska released the pressure slightly enough to let blood back into the man's face. "Who else knows about this? Just us and Kearns. Rusk, don't trust many." Chaska stood leaving the man, gasping in the snow. The wounded rider had managed to crawl toward his horse, but collapsed before reaching it. Chaska found Winona standing over the freight sledge, and inside, bound and gagged, but conscious, was Ayasha. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen, but fury burned in her expression. Winona tore the gag away. "Are you hurt badly?" Ayasha coughed, working her jaw. "They said Rusk wants us dead, all of us. No witnesses to whatever our grandmother saw." She glanced at Chaska. "They were waiting, knew we would come." Chaska cut her bonds with his knife and helped her from the sledge. As he did, he noticed something in the snow. A small Remington double Derringer Model 95 dropped during the struggle. Winona saw it too, bent down, and picked it up. She examined the weapon briefly, then held it out to Chaska. "This is yours by right of salvage," she said simply. Chaska took it, surprised by the gesture. Most settlers would have kept any found weapon without a second thought. He checked the chamber's one round loaded and pocketed it. Then he retrieved the fallen rider's Colt single-action Army model, 1873, and offered it to Winona. "Do you know how to use this? I have shot small game. Rabbits, once a turkey." He showed her the loading gate, how to check the cylinder, how to aim center mass rather than trying for precision shots that would miss under stress. His fingers overlapped hers on the wooden grip, and he was acutely aware of the contact, not romantic, but the intimacy of shared survival. "Keep it," he said. "You may need it before this is over." Winona nodded, sliding the Colt single-action Army model 1873 into her coat pocket. Chaska bound the two attackers' hands with their own belts, then sent them stumbling back toward Frost Hollow on foot. "Tell Kearns that the next men he sends will not walk back," he called after them. The wounded man looked back, hatred burning in his eyes. "You just killed yourself, Scout." "Not yet," Chaska replied. "Not today." They took the sledge's horse, a sturdy draft animal, and rode doubled toward a cottonwood grove on the outskirts of Frost Hollow. From the ridge, Chaska could see the town spread below, clapboard buildings, weathered gray, a schoolhouse with a crooked bell tower, the mine office gleaming with fresh paint and barred windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved through the streets, going about their business with the kind of routine that spoke of either ignorance or willful blindness to the rot beneath. "That is where the ledger is," Chaska asked Ayasha, pointing to the mine office. She nodded, wincing as she shifted weight off her injured ankle. "Third floorboard from the north wall. Grandmother told us before we left the cabin. She said it lists payments to men who helped stage the massacre." "Then we need to retrieve it," Winona said. "Tonight." Chaska shook his head. "Too many eyes watching. Kearns will expect us to try something reckless. So we wait while our grandmother dies. We prepare." He met her angry gaze steadily. "Going in blind gets us killed. We need information, allies, and timing." Winona's jaw clenched, but she nodded reluctantly. "Then teach me to use this properly," she said, pulling out the Colt single-action Army model 1873. Chaska led them to a clearing beyond the ridge, set up 3 stones as makeshift targets. He positioned Winona, carefully correcting her stance, feet, shoulder-width knees, slightly bent for recoil absorption. He showed her how to breathe low, how to squeeze the trigger in a steady pull rather than jerking it. "Do not aim for the head," he instructed. "Aim for the center of the body. Bigger target, harder to miss when adrenaline makes your hands shake." Winona fired 3 times. The first shot shattered a stone. The second hit dirt 6 inches to the left. The third clipped the edge of another stone, sending fragments spinning. "Better," Chaska said. "Not good enough. Good enough to survive a close encounter. That is all we need." Winona lowered the gun, looking at him with an expression he could not quite decipher. "You did not have to do any of this. Help us. Risk yourself. Why? Because leaving people to die when you had the power to help made you complicit in their death. Because his brother had died while Chaska was away, and the guilt of absence never fully faded. Because he had spent 2 years scouting for cavalry officers who blamed his people for crimes white men committed, and he was tired of being party to lies. Because I can help, he said, which was true but incomplete. And because what is happening to you is wrong. That should be reason enough. Winona studied him for a long moment, then nodded and returned the Colt single-action Army model 1873. Thank you. I could not shoot those men earlier, when they were running away. I thought I could, but killing is easier when someone is trying to kill you first, Chaska said, and there was no judgment in his voice. Not shooting a fleeing man shows wisdom, not weakness. They returned to the cabin as dusk settled over the valley. Inside, they found Dr. May, keeping vigil over Serafina while Eli stood guard by the window. The elder's breathing had steadied slightly, though she remained unconscious. May looked up as they entered. "She is holding," May said quietly, "but barely. The fever has not broken." Chaska crouched beside Serafina, listening to the rattle in her lungs. He thought of his mother, who had died from a similar fever when he was 16. No doctor had come for her. No one with pale skin had cared enough to try. He would not let that happen here. "We will retrieve the proof," he said to May, "and then Clem Rusk will answer for what he has done." May nodded, though worry creased her weathered face. "Be careful. Kearns has already posted notices in town. Says you three are wanted for fraud and theft. He is turning public opinion against you." "Does anyone believe him?" Winona asked. "Some do. Some do not. Thomas Reed, the schoolteacher, has been asking questions about the old surveys. He fought in the war, does not trust authority blindly. There are others who remember the massacre, who lost people. If you can give them proof—" May trailed off meaningfully. "Then we give them proof," Chaska said. Tonight, Frost Hollow after dark was a different animal than by daylight. Lanterns glowed in windows, casting rectangles of yellow light onto muddy streets. The saloon leaked noise and tobacco smoke. The mine office sat dark and quiet, locked tight. But Chaska had learned long ago that locks were built by men, which meant they could be defeated by men with patience and proper motivation. He entered the town alone, first moving through shadows, taking stock. Thomas Reed lived above the schoolhouse. Chaska had met him once, a middle-aged man with a pronounced limp from Gettysburg, and eyes that assessed people with unsettling accuracy. Chaska found him grading papers by candlelight. Reed looked up when Chaska tapped on the window, showed no surprise, and opened it. "I wondered when you would come. Dr. Whitcomb says you have been asking questions. About the land surveys, about the massacre 2 years back." Reed gestured for Chaska to enter. "I taught some of those settlers' children before they died. I want to know the truth." Chaska produced Serafina's letter, spreading it on Reed's desk. "This is a survey from 30 years ago, done by a French voyageur. Shows the true valley boundaries." Reed studied it by candlelight, comparing it to a county map he pulled from a drawer. His finger traced lines, stopped, traced again. "If this is accurate, the ambush site at Saut Mortel falls inside what should have been settler land, not unclaimed territory. Rusk could not have legally filed a pre-claim unless he made sure the land became available through violence, then blamed someone else," Chaska finished. Reed's face hardened. "I heard rumors, stories from miners about bodies being moved, about waste rock dumped in suspicious locations, but I had no proof. Serafina witnessed it. She kept records." Chaska pointed to her margin notes. 3 bodies at Saut Mortel, more beneath mine tailings. She knew where they were buried. And Rusk found out she knew," Reed said quietly. "That is why he is coming after her family." "Yes. We need the ledger from the mine office. It will show payments to the men who helped stage the massacre." Reed stood limping to a cabinet. He withdrew a Winchester Model 1873, similar to Chaska's. "Then let us go get it. This is not your fight." "The hell it is not," Reed said with quiet intensity. "Those were my students. If Rusk killed them for profit, then this is everyone's fight." Chaska nodded slowly. "There is a risk. If we are caught, then we are caught doing the right thing. I can live with that." They moved through the town in careful silence, avoiding lit areas. Winona and Ayasha waited near the schoolhouse's back entrance as planned. Reed let them inside, and they huddled in the cramped schoolroom. "The office will have at least one guard," Chaska said, sketching the layout in dust on the floor. "Possibly two. We need a distraction." "What kind?" Ayasha asked. Reed smiled grimly. "I learned a few useful skills during the war. Give me 10 minutes and something will pull their attention." They synchronized pocket watches, a luxury Chaska had acquired from a grateful rancher years back. At precisely midnight, they would move. Reed would create his distraction in the mine yard. Chaska and Winona would breach the office. Ayasha would keep watch signal if patrols approached. The wait was agonizing. Chaska used the time to check weapons, to review the plan for weaknesses, to prepare himself mentally for the violence that might come. Beside him, Winona sat with a Colt single-action Army Model 1873 in her lap, face calm but fingers restless. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. "Always," Chaska admitted. "Fear keeps you sharp. It is when you stop being afraid that you make fatal mistakes." "What if we fail? Then we try something else. Giving up is the only true failure." Winona smiled faintly. "You are a strange man, Chaska." "So I have been told." Midnight arrived. Reed slipped out the back door, moving with surprising stealth for a man with a bad leg. Chaska counted to 60, then gestured for Winona to follow. They circled the mine office, staying low. Chaska tested the back door, locked as expected. He examined the frame, found the hinges on the exterior. With careful pressure from his knife, he pried the pins free. The door lifted away, intact, silent. They slipped inside just as an explosion rocked the mine yard. Not large, Reed was too smart to risk serious damage, but loud enough to shatter the night's quiet. Voices shouted. Boots pounded toward the sound. The guard inside the office ran out, leaving the space unattended. Chaska counted planks from the north wall. Third one. He jammed his knife into the gap and pried. The old wood groaned, but gave way. Underneath, wrapped in oilskin, lay a leather ledger. He pulled it free, flipped it open. Names, dates, payment amounts, entries marked CR. Clem Rusk's initials for settler escort. Waste disposal, boundary adjustment. Proof. Footsteps approached faster than expected. Kearns's voice barked orders. Chaska shoved the ledger inside his coat and grabbed Winona's hand. "Out! Now!" They ran for the back door. Kearns appeared in the front entrance, saw them, and fired. The bullet splintered the doorframe inches from Winona's head. Chaska turned, fired back without aiming, forcing Kearns to dive behind a desk. They plunged into the alley where Ayasha waited, eyes wide with fear. "Riders coming from the north," she gasped. "Then we go south." Chaska led them at a dead run through back alleys, vaulting fences, splashing through half-frozen puddles. Behind them, torches bobbed and voices shouted. But darkness was their ally, and Chaska knew how to use it. They reached a ravine at the town's edge, slid down the steep embankment in a shower of loose rocks and ice. At the bottom, Chaska called a halt, listening. The pursuit passed above, moving deeper into town, searching in the wrong direction. "We did it," Ayasha whispered, incredulous. "We survived the first attempt," Chaska corrected. "The real fight is just beginning." They returned to the schoolhouse through a circuitous route, arriving just as Reed stumbled in through the front door, soot-stained but grinning. That got their attention. "Too much of it," Chaska replied, but he was smiling too, a rare expression that felt foreign on his face. "Thank you. Thank me when we finish this." They spread the ledger on Reed's desk and read by candlelight. The evidence was damning payments to known gunslingers dated 3 days before the massacre. Orders for excessive gunpowder logged the morning of the attack. Compensation marked disposal, paid to men whose reputations were for violence, not mining. This proves Rusk planned it, Winona said, voice shaking with controlled rage. It proves he paid for something, Reed corrected. We still need to connect it to the massacre explicitly. Chaska laid out Serafina's letter beside the ledger. Her notes list burial sites. If we can recover remains and match them to missing settlers, then we have murder conspiracy and fraud, Reed finished. Enough to hang Rusk 10 times over. If we can get the territorial marshal to listen, Winona said. Rusk owns the local law. Not all of it. Reed stood moving to the window. There are good people in this town. Miners who hate Rusk's methods. Farmers he has cheated. Families who lost loved ones. If we can show them proof, they will rise. But we need something more than papers. We need bodies, Chaska said grimly. We need to find where Rusk buried the massacre victims. The task felt impossible. But as dawn broke cold and pale over frost, Hollow Chaska realized that impossible was just another word for difficult. And difficult was something he had survived before. The next day unfolded with agonizing slowness. Serafina's condition remained precarious. Dr. May kept her sedated with laudanum, rationing the precious medicine, warning that supplies were running low. Winona and Ayasha took turns sitting vigil, faces hollow with exhaustion and fear. Chaska divided his time between guarding the cabin and scouting the mine's perimeter, studying routines, counting guards, looking for weaknesses. Eli proved his worth repeatedly, riding into town to gather information under the guise of shopping for supplies. He returned with troubling news. Kearns had increased patrols posted, wanted notices offering $20 for information leading to the fugitive's capture, and arrested 2 men for harboring criminals. Charges Eli suspected were fabricated to frighten potential allies into silence. The town is scared, Eli reported. But there is anger underneath. People know something is wrong. They just do not know what to do about it. We give them a reason to act, Chaska said. Tonight, we go to the mine. Find the burial site Serafina marked. That is suicide, Ayasha protested. The mine has guards' dogs, and Kearns knows we will try something. Which is why he will not expect us to try the most dangerous approach. Chaska traced a map in the dirt. There is an old shaft on the north side, collapsed years ago, but still accessible. Eli knows it from his time hauling ore. We go in through there, reach the lower galleries where the waste was dumped, and dig. And if we find nothing, Winona asked, then we try something else. Chaska met her eyes. But I do not think we will find nothing. That night, under a moon barely visible through thick clouds, 4 figures moved across the frozen landscape toward the mine. Chaska led, followed by Winona, Ayasha, limping but determined, and Eli, who carried rope and a lantern, shuddered to a thin slit. The mine loomed against the hillside like a wound in the earth, timber supports stark against snow. They avoided the main entrance where firelight glowed and voices carried. Instead, they circled to the old northern shaft, half hidden by a rockfall. Eli squeezed through first, testing the air. Smells stale but breathable, he reported. Watch your head. They descended single file into darkness. The shaft narrowed, forcing them to crawl. Water dripped somewhere ahead, a sound that echoed strangely. Chaska's shoulders scraped against rough stone, opening the old scar. Pain flared hot, but he ignored it. The shaft opened into a wider gallery, part of the mine's old workings abandoned when a richer vein was discovered deeper. Eli oriented himself, pointed left. Waste dump is this way. They used these old tunnels like a grave when I worked here. They followed his lead through passages that twisted and descended. The temperature dropped. Their breath steamed. Finally, they emerged into a large chamber filled with broken rock-rotted timber and refuse. The smell was earth and decay, thick enough to taste. Chaska consulted Serafina's notes by dim lantern light. Northwest corner. She marked it specifically. They dug with their hands, and Eli's small camp shovel moving rocks carefully to minimize noise. 10 minutes passed. 20. Chaska's fingers hit something that was not rock fabric, rotted but still intact. He pulled away more debris, revealing a shirt, then bones. Winona made a strangled sound. Ayasha turned away, retching quietly. "Check the skull," Chaska said to Eli, voice flat. Eli examined it, then looked up, face grim. Bullet hole, clean through, back of the head, execution style. That could be a miner who died in a cave-in. Winona said, though her tone suggested she did not believe it. Chaska moved to a second location Serafina had marked. More digging revealed another skeleton, this one smaller, a woman or teenager. Another bullet hole, this time through the ribs. The third site was larger, disturbed more recently. They uncovered 4 bodies tangled together, buried shallow and fast. Evidence of panic, of hiding something horrible. "We take the smallest skull," Chaska decided. "Easier to carry, and a dead child will move hearts more than numbers on paper." He wrapped the skull carefully in his spare shirt, tucking it into his pack, with a reverence that felt inadequate but necessary. They had just turned to leave when voices echoed down the tunnel. "Lights ahead," someone called. "Check it out." "Run," Eli hissed. They fled deeper into the mine, away from the voices. The tunnel split. Eli chose left without hesitation. They ran doubled over, boots splashing through cold water that seeped from cracks in the walls. The river, Chaska realized with growing horror, ran above and through this part of the mine. Snowmelt was finding old fissures, flooding the lower galleries. "We need to get out," Eli warned, "if this floods completely." A gunshot cracked deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Rock chips exploded near Chaska's head. He turned, saw torches behind them, fired back blindly to slow pursuit. The muzzle flash illuminated faces twisted with anger. They reached a vertical shaft, a raise that connected to the surface. A ladder, old and slick with moisture, climbed upward into darkness. Chaska went first, testing each rung. The wood creaked, but held. Winona followed, then Ayasha. Eli brought up the rear, pausing to fire down the tunnel, buying seconds. Halfway up, a rung broke beneath Winona's weight. She gasped, falling. Chaska's hand shot down, catching her wrist. His wounded shoulder screamed in protest, muscles tearing. He gritted his teeth, hauling her up through sheer force of will. She found footing, pressed against him in the narrow shaft face, inches from his. "I have you," he managed through clenched teeth. "Let go. You will fall. You will. Not today." He pulled harder, and she climbed past him to safety above. They emerged into freezing night air, gasping. Behind and below, the mine groaned a deep, ominous sound. Water rushed somewhere in the depths, flooding the lower galleries. The raise exit stood at the edge of a shale slope, unstable and treacherous. Thomas Reed appeared from nearby cover, carbine raised. "This way, quickly." "How did you—" Winona started. "Dr. May told me where you were going. I thought you might need backup." Reed fired once down the raised, discouraging pursuit. "Move." They slid and stumbled down the slope shale, sliding beneath their boots. At the bottom, Dr. May waited with horses. "Kearns is coming from the west, with at least 8 men. We need to go now." They mounted double and rode hard into darkness, leaving Frost Hollow's lights behind. No one spoke. The weight of what they had found and what it meant pressed down like the mountain above that flooded mine. They gathered in the schoolhouse attic as dawn broke gray and unwelcoming. The small space smelled of old books and mouse droppings. Thomas Reed lit a single candle, keeping the light low. Chaska spread Serafina's letter across a rough table, placing the county map beside it. Winona held the lantern steady while Ayasha watched the trapdoor Reed's carbine across her knees. "Look here," Chaska said, tracing coordinates on the Voyageur's old survey. "These markers match landmarks that still exist: the split cottonwood, the red rock formation, the creek bend. This shows the valley as it was surveyed 30 years ago." Reed compared it to the current county map. "The boundaries are different, shifted almost a full mile south." "Exactly." Chaska pointed to Serafina's margin notes. She marked the massacre site, Saut Mortel, the Death Leap. According to this old survey, it falls on land that should have remained open to homesteaders. But according to current maps, it is inside Rusk's pre-claimed fence. Winona leaned closer, understanding dawning. He moved the boundary lines, made it look like he owned land where settlers were already living. Then he killed them to make the false claim stick. Reed finished voice hard. And blamed Lakota raiders to justify taking the land without suspicion. Chaska felt ice form in his stomach. He reached into his pack and pulled out a folded document he had found in the mine office, a contract partially burned at the edges, but still legible. "This is signed by Rusk and Captain Mercer, dated 2 weeks before the massacre." Reed took it, read carefully, and his face darkened. "This is a payment contract. $500 to provide evidence of hostile activity and file an official report with the territorial governor." "Mercer," Chaska said, and the name tasted like poison. "I knew him. 3 years ago, he tried to hire me as a scout, wanted me to falsify tracks, make it look like Lakota had raided a settlement when the evidence clearly showed white men on shod horses." Winona looked at him sharply. "What did you do?" "I refused. Walked away from the money." The memory burned. "Mercer called me a traitor, threatened to have me arrested. I left before he could make good on the threat." He paused, the weight of old guilt pressing down. "A month later, I heard about the massacre at Saut Mortel. Mercer filed the report blaming Lakota. I suspected he had lied, but I had no proof. And I did nothing." "You could not have known," Winona said quietly. "I knew he was corrupt. I knew he would lie to advance his career. I should have warned someone, done something." Chaska's hands curled into fists. "My silence let him get away with it. Let him blame my people for murder they did not commit." Reed set the contract down carefully. "Guilt is a luxury we cannot afford right now. What matters is that we have proof. Have Rusk, Kearns, and Mercer conspired to stage a massacre and profit from it. This letter shows the true boundaries. The ledger shows payments. The skull proves murder. Together, it is enough to demand a territorial investigation." A floorboard creaked below. Everyone froze. Footsteps crossed the schoolroom, measured, unhurried. A voice called up, "I know you are up there. Come down. No one has to get hurt." Kearns. Chaska moved to the trapdoor, peered through a gap. Kearns stood below, flanked by 2 deputies, pistol drawn, but not aimed. His face was calm, almost pleasant. That scared Chaska more than open aggression. "We just want to talk," Kearns continued. "Clear up some misunderstandings." Reed looked at Chaska, question in his eyes. Chaska shook his head minutely. Talking would mean custody, and custody would mean disappearing. He had seen it happen before. Kearns's pleasantness evaporated. "Fine, have it your way." He raised his pistol and fired through the ceiling. Wood exploded, splinters raining down. "Next time I aim at shadows. Come down now." Reed responded by firing 3 shots through the floorboards, in a tight pattern, forcing Kearns and his men to scramble for cover. "Run," he shouted upward. Chaska was already moving, dragging Winona toward a loose board near the eaves. He and Eli pried it free, revealing a gap barely wide enough to squeeze through. Chaska went first, lowering himself onto the sloped roof, then reached back for Winona. Their hands clasped, and he pulled her through. Ayasha followed, moving with surprising agility despite her ankle. The roof was ice-slicked and treacherous, below a 12-foot drop to the alley. Chaska scanned for options, saw a rain barrel against the adjacent building's wall. There, jump for the barrel roll to absorb impact. Ayasha went first, landed hard, but rolled as instructed, came up limping but mobile. Winona hesitated at the edge. Chaska moved beside her. Together, on 3. They jumped. For a heartbeat, there was only air and velocity. Then impact. Chaska's boots hit the barrel's rim. He pushed off, landed in a crouch that sent pain screaming through his bad shoulder. Winona landed beside him, stumbled. He caught her arm, steadied her. Kearns emerged from the schoolhouse front door, spotted them, and fired. The bullet pinged off a metal bucket, ricocheting with a high whine. They ran. The town was waking, shopkeepers opening, miners heading to the Pitt families starting their day. Chaska led the flight through narrow spaces between buildings, over fences, through a cooper's yard, where barrels were stacked like barricades. Behind them, Kearns rallied his men. Torches lit. Dogs barked. The hunt was on. They reached a freight yard at the town's edge, ducked behind a wagon stacked with ore. Chaska's shoulder was bleeding again, warm wetness soaking his shirt. Winona saw it, started to speak, but he shook his head. Later. We cannot outrun them forever, Ayasha whispered, breathing hard. We do not need to outrun them forever. Just until we reach Eli's cabin. Chaska pointed toward a gap in the buildings. Through there, across the creek, then we are clear. They moved on his signal, staying low. The creek was half frozen, treacherous with ice. They crossed in single file, Chaska testing each step. Winona followed close, then Ayasha. They were nearly across when a shot rang out. Ayasha cried out, stumbled. Winona grabbed her before she could fall through the ice. I am fine, Ayasha gasped. Grazed my leg. I can move. Chaska glanced back. Kearns stood on the far bank, reloading. Chaska fired twice, forcing him to dive for cover. Then they were across and running again. Eli's cabin appeared through the trees, small, weathered, but solid. Eli barred the door behind them, while Chaska collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Dr. May was already there, having ridden ahead. She moved to Ayasha, first examining the wound. Through and through missed bone, May pronounced. Clean it, bandage it, you will be fine. She turned to Chaska. Let me see that shoulder. Chaska peeled away his shirt. The old scar had torn open, blood flowing freely. May cleaned it with sharp-smelling liquid that burned like fire, then stitched it with practiced efficiency. You are going to run out of shoulder at this rate, she said dryly. How is Serafina? Winona asked. May's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral. She woke this morning, asked for you. I do not think she has much time left. They rode immediately, Chaska gritting his teeth against the pain in his shoulder. At the cabin, Serafina lay propped up, face waxy and eyes too bright. She smiled when Winona entered, reached out a trembling hand. Ma petite. Her voice was thin as silk thread. You are safe. We have the proof, grandmother. Everything you told us to find. Winona knelt beside her, tears streaming. You were right, about all of it. Good. Serafina's gaze shifted to Chaska. You protect them. Yes. Yes, grandmother, I promise. Merci. Her eyes closed, opened once more. The valley. You write it true. Justice. She took one more breath, released it, and was still. The silence that followed was profound, and terrible. Ayasha sobbed openly. Winona's face froze into a mask of controlled grief. Chaska stood helpless, knowing that no words could bridge the chasm of loss. They buried Serafina that afternoon on a hill overlooking the valley she had fought to protect. The grave was shallow, the ground frozen too hard for proper depth, but they piled stones into a cairn that would last. Winona spoke words in French that Chaska understood: prayers for the dead, promises to the living, a vow that justice would be done. He added a Lakota blessing, asking the spirits to guide her path, and then stepped back. She died fighting, Ayasha said quietly. That is something. It is everything, Chaska replied. That night they gathered in Eli's cabin to plan their next move. The evidence was damning, but Rusk still controlled the local law. They needed to reach the territorial marshal, convince him to intervene. But the marshal's office was 3 days' ride north through territory, where Kearns's men could easily intercept them. I will go, Dr. May volunteered. Kearns will not stop a lone woman riding to the fort for medical supplies. Once there, I can contact the marshal directly. And if they do not believe you, Reed asked, then I bring him back anyway. Show him the bodies in the mine, the ledger, the letter. Physical evidence is hard to ignore. It was decided. May would leave at first light. The rest of them would stay hidden, gathering what additional evidence they could. And they would wait. But waiting, Chaska had learned, was the hardest part. Dr. May rode out before dawn, saddlebags packed with legitimate medical supplies and hidden documents. Chaska watched her go with a mix of hope and dread. Everything now depended on her reaching the marshal, convincing him to act, and returning with help before Rusk moved to eliminate all remaining witnesses. 2 days passed in agonizing slowness. They stayed at Eli's cabin, too exposed to move elsewhere. Eli made trips into town, bringing back supplies, and news none of it good. Rusk had offered a $100 reward for information leading to their capture. Kearns had arrested Thomas Reed on charges of sedition and conspiracy. The town was dividing. Some people defended Reed, others stayed silent out of fear. We need to break Reed out, Winona said on the second evening. That would confirm Kearns's charges, Chaska countered. We need him free, but legally free, when May returns with the marshal. If she returns? Ayasha interrupted. We have not heard anything. What if Kearns's men caught her? Then we proceed without her. Chaska checked his Winchester Model 1873 for the 10th time. But we wait one more day. That night, unable to sleep, Chaska sat outside under cold stars. Winona found him there, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. She sat without speaking, and for a long time, they simply existed in parallel silence. Tell me about your brother, she finally said. Chaska was surprised by the request. He rarely spoke of Dakota. He was younger, 17 when he died. Quick to laugh, slow to anger, the opposite of me in most ways. How did it happen? Railroad construction. The company pushed through Lakota land without proper agreements, just took what they wanted. My brother went to protest peacefully, along with others from our band. The foremen claimed they were threatening workers. There was a struggle. A rail tie fell or was dropped. Accounts differ and crushed him. Chaska's voice remained flat, emotionless, flat. The company paid $50 in compensation. $50 for a life. Winona absorbed this. And you have carried that ever since. I was not there. I was working as a scout 2 territories away. By the time I heard and returned, he was already buried. I could not protect him. Could not even say goodbye. You could not have known. That does not make it easier. Chaska picked up a piece of gravel, turned it over in his fingers. I told myself I would never let it happen again. that I would protect the people I could reach. But there are always more people suffering than I have hands to help. It is not enough. Winona shifted closer, and their shoulders touched. It does not have to be enough. It just has to be something. You saved us. That counts. Your grandmother died anyway. She died fighting. Because of you, she died knowing her truth would be told. That is more than most people get. Chaska looked at her, at the strength in her face, the firelight reflected in gray eyes that refused to look away from hard truths. Something shifted in his chest, a sensation he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Not love, not yet, but the recognition that perhaps he did not have to carry everything alone. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For reminding me why this matters." Winona's hand found his fingers interlacing. They sat like that until dawn, not speaking, just holding on. The third day brought Dr. May's return and the territorial marshal. U.S. Marshal Calloway was a lean man in his 50s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He examined their evidence, methodically, ledger letters, skull contract. He questioned each person separately, comparing accounts, looking for inconsistencies. Finally, he nodded. "This is sufficient for an investigation. I will place Clem Rusk under arrest pending trial. Deputy Kearns as well." "What about Captain Mercer?" Chaska asked. "I will issue a warrant. If he is still in the territory, we will find him." Calloway paused. "I need you all to testify when this goes to trial. Are you willing?" They agreed. Calloway rode into Frost Hollow with 4 deputies officially assuming jurisdiction. They arrested Rusk at his mine office, Kearns at the jail. Thomas Reed was released, charges dropped. The town erupted into chaos, some celebrating, others protesting, everyone talking at once. But Kearns escaped during the transfer to the territorial lockup. One moment he was in custody, the next he had overpowered a deputy and fled on horseback. Calloway was furious, doubling patrols, offering a reward. But Kearns knew the territory had allies and disappeared like smoke. "He will come back," Chaska said with certainty. "He has too much to lose. He will try to destroy the evidence or kill the witnesses." "Then we guard both," Calloway replied. But guarding against a desperate man with nothing left to lose was like guarding against the wind. You could prepare, but you could never be entirely safe. 2 nights later, smoke woke them. The cabin was on fire. They fled into darkness, coughing, half-dressed. Flames consumed the structure with terrifying speed, the old dry wood catching like tinder. Outside shapes moved in the darkness. Gunfire cracked. A bullet punched through Eli's hat, missing his skull by inches. "Into the trees!" Chaska shouted. They scattered, using tactics born of desperation. Chaska laid down covering fire, while Winona dragged Ayasha toward the forest. Eli circled wide, trying to flank the attackers. U.S. Marshal Calloway and his deputies arrived, drawn by the flames, and joined the fight. In the chaos, Chaska saw Kearns silhouetted against the burning cabin rifle, raised, aiming at Winona. Chaska fired without conscious thought. The bullet caught Kearns in the leg, spinning him. Kearns fell but did not drop his weapon. He crawled toward the mine, toward familiar ground. "I will end this," Chaska said to Calloway. "That is my job. He will disappear into the mine. I know those tunnels now. Let me finish it." Calloway hesitated, then nodded. "Do not kill him unless you have no choice. I want him to stand trial." "I will try." Chaska followed Kearns' blood trail toward the mine, reloading as he moved. Behind him, Winona called his name. He turned, saw her running to catch up, Colt single-action Army model 1873 in hand. You do not have to, he started. I know. I am choosing to. Her face was set with determination. Together. He nodded, and they descended into darkness one more time. The final confrontation unfolded in 3 phases, each more desperate than the last, each testing the limits of courage and endurance. Kearns fled toward the mine's northern approach, where the Blue Elk River cut through a gorge spanned by a timber trestle. The trestle carried the mine's rail line for ore carts, and it was the only crossing for miles. Ice coated every surface, glittering in moonlight. Below, black water rushed over rocks with a sound like constant thunder. Chaska and Winona reached the trestle just as Kearns started across. The deputy was limping badly, bleeding freely, but driven by the desperate energy of a cornered animal. He turned, fired wildly. The bullet went wide, but it forced them to take cover behind the stone abutment. We can wait him out, Winona said. He is injured. He will weaken. Or he reaches the other side and disappears into the mountains. Chaska studied the trestle 40 yards long, open on all sides, no cover. We go now. That is suicide. So is letting him escape. Chaska met her eyes. Trust me. Winona's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Together. They moved onto the trestle, staying low. The planks were spaced for cartwheels, not feet. Gaps between them showed the drop to churning water. Ice made every step treacherous. Halfway across, Kearns turned and fired twice more. One bullet splintered a plank near Chaska's boot. The other clipped Winona's coat, missing flesh by a hair's breadth. Chaska returned fire, not aiming to kill, but to suppress. Kearns ducked, kept moving. Then the deputy did something unexpected. He kicked hard at a support post, already weakened by flood damage. Wood groaned. The trestle shuddered. He's trying to collapse it with us on it, Winona shouted. Run! They sprinted across ice-slicked planks as the trestle groaned and swayed. Behind them, a support beam gave way, with a sound like a cannon shot. Planks tilted, sagging toward the river. Chaska grabbed Winona's hand, pulling her forward with strength he did not know he still possessed. They dove for the far side just as the center section collapsed into the river, taking 2 entire rail segments with it. They lay gasping on frozen ground, the gap behind them impassable. Kearns was ahead, limping toward the mine office. Chaska struggled to his feet, every muscle screaming protest. Can you continue? He asked Winona. Can you stop me? She replied. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Rusk's mine office still stood despite the marshal's seizure of records. The building itself was property of the company, not subject to confiscation. Kearns had reached it, was inside desperately gathering documents. Through the barred window, Chaska saw him pulling papers from hidden compartments, stuffing them into a canvas bag. He is destroying evidence, Winona said, or trying to save copies to bargain with. Chaska tested the front door, locked from inside. We go in through the window. He used his rifle butt to smash the glass clearing shards from the frame. They climbed through into smoke-filled darkness. Kearns had knocked over a lantern, whether accidentally or deliberately, and flames were spreading across oil-soaked floorboards. Kearns appeared from behind a filing cabinet, swinging a fire poker. Chaska barely got his rifle up in time to block. Metal rang against metal. They grappled, crashing into a desk that collapsed under their combined weight. Papers scattered, some catching fire. Winona circled, looking for an opening to help, without risking a shot that might hit Chaska in the close quarters. Kearns broke free, grabbed the poker again, and swung at her. She ducked, rolled, came up with the Colt single-action Army Model 1873, aimed steady. Do not move, she commanded. Kearns laughed, a sound edged with madness. You will not shoot. I can see it in your eyes. Try me. He lunged. Winona fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, not a killing shot, but enough to spin him around. He crashed into a shelf, bringing down ledgers and maps. Flames were everywhere now, heat building to furnace intensity. "We have to leave," Chaska shouted, grabbing documents that had not yet caught fire, copies of surveys, more payment records, anything that could be evidence. Kearns struggled to his feet, still clutching his canvas bag, and staggered toward the back door. Chaska let him go. Priorities, clear, preserve, evidence, escape alive. They dove through the front door as the roof caught. The entire structure was engulfed within minutes, flames reaching toward the night sky. Outside, U.S. Marshal Calloway and his deputies were arriving, along with Thomas Reed, Dr. May Eli, and a growing crowd of townspeople drawn by the fire. Kearns emerged from the back, silhouetted against flames, and ran toward the mine entrance, toward the one place he still knew better than anyone else. Into the mine, Chaska said grimly. "He is going to Sault Mortel. He knows we buried evidence there. He will try to destroy it or use it as leverage." "I am coming," Eli said. "I know those tunnels." "So am I," Reed added, checking his carbine. "And me," Winona said, reloading the Colt single-action Army Model 1873 with hands that no longer shook. Chaska looked at her, at the soot on her face, the determination in her stance, the way she had become someone who could stare into fire and not flinch. He nodded once. "Then we finish this." The mine at night was a portal to hell. Timber beams groaned under the weight of mountain. Water seeped from fissures, pooling ankle-deep in places. The river was still flooding the lower galleries, and the sound of rushing water came from multiple directions at once. They descended carefully, following Kearns's trail blood drops on stone-disturbed water, the mark of a man who knew he was dying, but refused to surrender. The main drift led toward Sault Mortel, the deepest and oldest section of the mine. Chaska had studied maps. He knew this tunnel connected to the river through natural caves. If the flood was as bad as it sounded, they were walking into a death trap. They found Kearns in the chamber where they had uncovered bodies. He had rigged dynamite to the support beams enough to collapse this entire section, burying the evidence forever. His hands shook as he tried to light a match. "It is over, Kearns," U.S. Marshal Calloway called from the tunnel entrance. "Drop the match. Come quietly. You will get a trial." Kearns laughed bitterly. "A trial so I can hang in public instead of being buried here." He finally got the match lit. "I choose my own end." He touched it to the fuse. It caught hissing and sparking. Everything happened at once. Eli fired, trying to hit the fuse, missed. Kearns dove for cover. Water surged from a crack in the wall, a sudden geyser that knocked Chaska off his feet. The river had breached. Winona lunged forward, sloshing through water that was rising by the second, and grabbed the burning fuse. She tried to pull it free from the dynamite. Bundle could not. The knot was too tight, the fuse too well secured. She did the only thing she could. She tore it from the blasting cap, extinguishing the spark in the flood water. The chamber flooded faster. Water poured from multiple cracks, now driven by immense pressure. It was already knee-deep and rising. They had minutes at most before this entire section would be underwater. "Out," Chaska shouted. "Everyone out now." They fought against the current, helping each other stay upright. Eli led navigating by memory. Reed brought up the rear, making sure no one fell behind. The water reached waist-deep, then chest-deep, carrying debris that slammed into legs and bodies. Ahead, a vertical shaft, the raise they had used before. The ladder was still there, rungs slick and treacherous. Eli climbed first, testing each step. Then Winona, moving with agonizing care. Ayasha, who had refused to stay behind, followed her injured leg, making every step an ordeal. Chaska stayed in the water, supporting those climbing, making sure everyone got ahead of him. Kearns appeared from a side passage, desperate, drowning, grabbing at anything. He seized Chaska's coat, trying to use him as an anchor. "Help me, please." Chaska grabbed Kearns' wrist, straining to pull them both toward the ladder. But the deputy was dead weight, panicking, dragging them both under. Chaska's wounded shoulder tore again. He felt tissue give way, blood hot against the cold water. "Climb," he shouted to Kearns. "Use the ladder." Kearns looked up at the ladder, then at Chaska, and something cold entered his eyes. Instead of climbing, he pulled harder, deliberately, trying to drag Chaska down. If he was dying, he would take someone with him. Winona appeared at the top of the shaft, saw what was happening. "Let him go," she screamed. Chaska's grip slipped. He made a choice, live or die, with a murderer. He opened his hand. Kearns fell back into the surging water, eyes wide with shock and betrayal. The current took him, slamming him into a timber support. He went under, did not resurface. Chaska climbed arms, shaking with exhaustion, lungs burning. Hands reached down Eli's, Reed's, Winona's, pulling him up and out into cold night air. They collapsed on the frozen ground, gasping, soaked alive. Behind them, the mine groaned and settled. Part of the Saut Mortel section collapsed, sealing off the flooded galleries. Kearns's body would be buried there, perhaps fitting justice for the man who had helped bury so many others. Rusk, it turned out, had not died from his wounds. He had been under guard at Dr. May's clinic, and when the chaos of the fire and pursuit drew the guards away, he had tried to escape. Captain Mercer had appeared, drawn by desperation or greed to help him flee. But U.S. Marshal Calloway had anticipated this, had positioned deputies specifically to watch for such an attempt. The confrontation had been brief. Mercer had fired first, wounding a deputy. Thomas Reed, present at the clinic to give testimony, had returned fire with his old soldier's accuracy. Mercer fell gut-shot, dying slowly. Rusk had tried to run despite his injuries, but collapsed within 50 yards, blood loss and exhaustion finally claiming him. Chaska learned all this afterward, sitting in Dr. May's clinic while she stitched his shoulder for what she swore would be the last time. "You have no more tissue left to tear," she said with grim humor. "Next time, you will need to grow new muscle first." Winona sat beside him, silent, her hand resting on his uninjured arm, not holding, just present. Ayasha dozed in the corner, exhausted beyond words. Outside, dawn was breaking over Frost Hollow. It was over. The town gathered in the street outside the schoolhouse 3 days later. U.S. Marshal Calloway stood on the steps, Thomas Reed beside him, holding the ledger and Seraphina's letter. The skull sat on a cloth-covered table, grim evidence, undeniable proof. These documents prove that Clem Rusk, Deputy Bram Kearns, and Captain Mercer conspired to murder settlers, falsify land surveys, and profit from stolen property. Calloway announced to the crowd. They staged a massacre, blamed innocent people, and used their positions of authority to cover their crimes for 2 years. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, anger, shock, vindication. A miner stepped forward, an older man with scarred hands. "My brother died in that massacre. We were told it was raiders. You are saying it was murder?" "Yes," Calloway said simply. "I am sorry." The miner's face crumpled. Others came forward, a widow whose husband had disappeared, a woman whose sister's family had been killed, men who had been forced off their land by false debt claims. Each story added weight to the accounting. Eli Hargis spoke, though his voice shook. "Rusk paid me to dump waste rock over the creek after the massacre. Said it was routine tailings disposal. I did not know there were bodies underneath. I swear I did not know." "You know now," Reed said firmly, but not unkindly. "And you testified truthfully. That counts for something." Dr. May stepped forward. "For years, people in this town knew something was wrong, but were too afraid to speak. Fear is a weapon these men used as effectively as guns. But fear only works if we let it. Thomas Reed raised Serafina's letter. This woman died protecting the truth. She witnessed murder and documented it at great personal risk. We owe it to her and to all the victims to ensure justice is done. The territorial court will try Rusk's estate in absentia since he died before trial. All properties and holdings gained through fraud will be returned to rightful owners or their heirs. The land surveys will be corrected using the original voyageur maps. What about our claims? A homesteader called out. Some of us lost everything. You will have the opportunity to refile under the correct boundaries, Calloway replied. The territorial office is sending surveyors to properly mark the land. It will take time, but it will be done right. The crowd began to disperse slowly, processing the weight of revelation. Some wept. Others talked in tight, angry clusters. A few approached Chaska, Winona, and Ayasha, offering thanks, apologies, promises to remember. A woman with 2 children touched Winona's arm. Your grandmother was brave. We will not forget her. Winona nodded, unable to speak, past the tightness in her throat. That evening, Chaska walked to the hill where they had buried Serafina. The cairn still stood stones undisturbed. He had brought the blue enamel music box, intending to bury it here, a final gesture. But when he opened it, the music played so sweetly that he could not bring himself to silence it forever. Winona appeared beside him, as she often did, moving quietly enough that he should have been startled, but never was. What will you do now? She asked. Chaska considered the question. I do not know. Scout work, maybe. Hunt for families who need meat. Help rebuild what was broken. Will you stay in Frost Hollow? For a while. He glanced at her. Will you? Ayasha and I talked about it. We have nothing elsewhere. Our grandmother's land will be returned to us legally now. We thought we might try to make a life here, if the town will let us. They will? How can you be sure? Because you fought for them when you had no obligation to. Because you stood when it would have been easier to run. People remember that. Winona was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I remember something else too. What is that? You promised my grandmother you would protect us. You kept that promise, even when it nearly killed you. Chaska had no response to that. Promises were meant to be kept. That was simply how things worked. But he saw something shift in Winona's expression, gratitude transforming into something deeper, more complex. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. You do not need to keep thanking me. I know, but I want to. She stepped closer, and their shoulders touched a point of contact that had become familiar over the past days of shared crisis. Will you stay for dinner tomorrow at the cabin once we rebuild it? Ayasha is planning to cook something that is not stew. Chaska felt his mouth curve into what might have been a smile. I will be there. Winona's hand found his fingers interlacing with the easy comfort of people who had learned to trust each other through fire and flood and violence. They stood together on the hill as the sun set over Frost Hollow, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson. Below the town continued its slow transformation. Not healed that would take years, but healing. And that Chaska thought was enough for now. 3 months passed. Winter gave way to early spring snow, melting into creeks that ran high and clear. Frost Hollow changed in ways both visible and subtle. Thomas Reed was elected constable in a legitimate vote, the first fair election the town had seen in years. Dr. May received a town stipend to continue her work, finally able to purchase supplies without worry. Eli Hargis reclaimed his field with help from neighbors who had previously been too afraid to defy Rusk's hold on the community. He planted wheat and by mid-spring green shoots pushed through dark earth. The bodies buried at Saut Mortel were recovered and given proper burials, 16 people in total. Each identified where possible, each mourned. A memorial stone was placed in the town square with their names carved deep. Murdered for greed, remembered in truth. Chaska attended the dedication standing at the back, but Winona found him and pulled him forward to stand with the families. "You brought them justice," she said. "You belong here." Captain Mercer, it was discovered, had survived his gut wound long enough to confess fully partly from pain. Induced delirium, partly from spite. He named co-conspirators in the territorial office, other officers who had taken bribes, politicians who had looked the other way. His testimony, recorded by U.S. Marshal Calloway, sparked investigations that would ripple through the territory for years. The territorial surveyor who had authenticated Rusk's false boundaries was arrested, tried and sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. Rusk's mining operation was dissolved, assets seized. The mine itself was reopened under cooperative management by the workers' profits distributed fairly for the first time in its existence. Winona and Ayasha reclaimed their grandmother's land, 40 acres of good soil with a spring-fed creek. They rebuilt the cabin with help from Eli Reed and a dozen other townspeople who showed up unannounced one morning with lumber and tools and determination. Chaska worked alongside them, his shoulder finally healed enough for heavy labor, though it would never move quite the same way again. They also opened a soup tent near the rebuilt schoolhouse, serving meals to anyone who needed them. Miners, travelers, families fallen on hard times. The tent became a gathering place, proof that kindness could grow from the ashes of cruelty. Children came for stew and stories. Women came for company and shared knowledge. Men came for honest conversation without fear of being overheard by Rusk's informants. Chaska continued his work as a scout, but differently. He guided settlers honestly, warning them of hard terrain and predatory land deals alike. He hunted game for families who could not hunt for themselves. He taught tracking and wilderness survival to anyone interested in learning. Slowly, his reputation changed, no longer just that Lakota scout, but Chaska, the honest one. It was a small shift, but it mattered. One evening in late spring, Chaska sat at the river trestle, now repaired, reinforced, safer than before. The water below ran clear, no longer swollen with snowmelt. He was thinking about his brother, as he often did, but the grief had shifted. It would never disappear entirely, but it no longer paralyzed him. He had learned that you carried the dead with you, not by drowning in guilt, but by living in ways that honored their memory. Winona found him there, as she so often did. She had a way of appearing when he needed company even, or especially when he did not know he needed it. "You could leave," she said, sitting beside him on the trestle's edge. "Ride out tomorrow. No one would blame you. You have done more than enough." Chaska had thought about it. The frontier called to him sometimes, the open spaces and solitude that had been his only companions for so long. But something had changed over the winter. Frost Hollow felt less like a place he was passing through and more like somewhere he might belong. "I am not ready to leave yet," he said. "Why not?" He looked at her, at the strength in her profile, and the way the setting sun caught in her dark hair, the calluses on her hands from honest work. "Because there are still things worth staying for." Winona turned to meet his gaze, and something passed between them that did not need words. Not love, perhaps not yet, but the foundation of it. Respect earned through shared danger. Trust built through kept promises. The beginning of something that might grow, given time and patience. "Will you come for dinner?" she asked. "Ayasha has been practicing with spices we traded for. She promises it will be edible." "I will be there." They stood together, and Winona offered her hand for the climb down from the trestle. Chaska took it, and they descended together into the valley, where lantern light glowed in cabin windows and smoke rose from chimneys, and the town that had nearly destroyed itself was learning slowly, imperfectly to heal. At the cabin, Ayasha had indeed cooked something more ambitious than stew a venison roast with wild onions and herbs that filled the small space with rich smells. Thomas Reed had stopped by bringing fresh bread from the new bakery. Dr. May arrived with a bottle of whiskey she claimed was purely medicinal. Eli brought his fiddle and played songs that ranged from mournful to joyful sometimes within the same melody. They ate together, laughed together, remembered together. When the talk turned to Serafina, it was with warmth rather than only grief stories of her stubbornness, her courage, her insistence on documenting truth, even when it put her at risk. "She would be proud of you," Dr. May said to the twins. "Both of you." "She would be proud of all of us," Winona corrected, glancing around the table. "She wanted justice, and we gave it to her." Later, after the others had left and Ayasha had fallen asleep in the loft, Chaska helped Winona bank the fire for the night. They worked in comfortable silence, a routine they had fallen into without discussion. As they finished, Winona caught his hand. "Stay," she said quietly. "Not just tonight, but stay, in Frost Hollow. Help us build something better." Chaska looked into her gray eyes and saw not just invitation, but partnership. A chance to be part of something larger than his own survival. A possibility he had not dared imagine even a few months ago. "I will stay," he said, "as long as you want me here. That might be a very long time. I can manage that." Winona smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to beautiful. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. "Good. Because tomorrow we are clearing the north field, and I will need someone who knows how to work without complaining." "I never complain." "You are a terrible liar." "I know." He left before dawn, as was proper, but returned the next morning with tools and determination. And the morning after that. And the one after that, until it became understood without formal declaration that he was part of their small community. Not a visitor, not a temporary ally, but someone who belonged. Months turned into seasons. Summer brought growth. Autumn brought harvest. The town held elections, founded a legitimate newspaper, established a school board that included women and minors alongside landowners. Progress came in increments, not revolutions, but it was real. 1 year after the night they had fled into the snow, pursued by wolves, Chaska stood on the same hill where Serafina was buried. The cairn had been expanded into a small memorial garden, tended by Ayasha, who had discovered an unexpected talent for growing things. Wildflowers bloomed between the stones, blue and yellow, and purple defiant splashes of color against gray rock. Winona climbed the hill to join him, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew the terrain intimately. She carried the blue enamel music box, which now lived on a shelf in their cabin, carefully preserved, occasionally played, always treasured. "I was thinking," she said, standing beside him. "My grandmother spent her whole life fighting to protect this valley, to preserve truth when everyone else wanted convenient lies." "She succeeded," Chaska said. "She started it. We have to finish it." Winona turned to face him fully. "I want to do something with the land. Not just farm it, but use it to help others. Maybe a place where people can come when they have nowhere else. Travelers, families escaping bad situations, people like we were." Chaska considered this. It was ambitious, possibly impractical, and exactly the kind of thing that made sense from someone who had survived what Winona had survived. "That would take work." "I know, but I think we could do it. Together." "Together," Chaska repeated, and the word felt like a promise. Not the dramatic vows of frontier romance stories, but something quieter and more enduring. A commitment forged through shared struggle built on mutual respect, grounded in the kind of partnership that could weather storms. Winona's hand found his, and they stood together on the hill as the sun climbed higher. Below Frost Hollow continued its daily rhythms, people working, children playing, smoke rising from chimneys. Imperfect, but honest. Scarred, but healing. That evening, they checked the rifle rack by the cabin door, together a ritual now practiced and automatic. Chaska's Winchester Model 1873. Winona's Colt Single Action Army. Model 1873 powder and shot measured and ready. Not because they expected violence, but because preparation was the price of safety. They stepped out into the evening light, shoulders aligned, moving with the unconscious synchronization of people who had learned to read each other's rhythms. Ayasha was already in the garden tending plants. Thomas Reed was riding up the path, probably with news or needing advice. Dr. May would arrive later, as she did most evenings, to share a meal and conversation. This was their life now. Not perfect, not without challenges, but honest, but earned. Built from truth instead of lies, from justice instead of greed, from partnership instead of domination. Chaska had come to Frost Hollow as a stranger, following tracks in the snow, expecting nothing more than to help someone survive a winter night. He had found a family instead, a purpose, a reason to believe that one person's courage could matter, could ripple outward, could change not just individual lives, but entire communities. He looked at Winona, who smiled at him with warmth and understanding, and he knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found what he had been searching for since his brother died, a way to honor the past by building something better in the future. The wolves of Frost Hollow had been driven back, some on 4 legs, some on 2. The buried truth had been unearthed and spoken aloud. And in the space where lies had once festered, something new was growing. Fragile still, but rooted deep and reaching toward light. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything.